On a warm morning in May 2025 in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré woke up to the familiar sound of birds singing in the courtyard of the presidential palace. At 37, the young military leader had grown accustomed to the intense routine since taking power in 2022. But this morning, something would completely change the course of his international agenda. His communications advisor, Moussa Sankara, hurried into the presidential office with a tablet in his hands. "President, you need to see this urgently," he said, a worried expression on his dark face, sweating from the 35 degrees Celsius morning heat that was already casting a shadow under the acacia trees in the garden. Ibrahim looked up from the agricultural policy documents he had been reviewing since 5 a.m., wearing his signature olive-green military shirt. He picked up his tablet and saw the headlines on major U.S. news outlets. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett faces racist attacks after criticizing Trump's foreign policy. The Texas Democratic Congresswoman, known for her strong stance on civil rights and international policy, had made bold statements about the new Trump administration's Africa policies. Speaking before a congressional committee, she sharply criticized cuts in humanitarian aid to Sahel countries, including Burkina Faso. They are cutting aid to countries that need it most while increasing unnecessary military spending. This is inhumane and contrary to American values, Crockett said in the televised session. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Social media was flooded with racist and misogynistic comments against the 43-year-old African-American congresswoman. Influencers close to Trump attacked her personally, questioning her loyalty to America and using clearly discriminatory language. Ibrahim closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility. As the leader of an African country that had broken ties with colonial France and was seeking new international partners, he knew his words would have a global impact. The air conditioning in his office hummed softly as he pondered his next decision. "Moussa, call a press conference for 2 p.m., he finally said, his firm voice echoing off the walls, decorated with traditional Burkina Faso art. "It's time to talk about dignity and mutual respect among nations." At 1:30 p.m., the presidential palace press room was bustling with local journalists and international correspondents. The scorching Ouagadougou sun forced security guards to hand out water to professionals waiting outside the converted colonial building. Ibrahim Traoré arrived promptly at 2 p.m., walking with the erect posture that characterized his military leadership. He wore the official olive-green uniform with the presidential insignia, and his young face maintained the seriousness of someone who carried the destiny of 22 million Burkinabe. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," he began, looking directly into the cameras. "I have come to speak out about the unacceptable attacks that American Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett has suffered for defending the humanitarian interests of the African people." The silence in the room was total. Only the noise of the ceiling fans cut the tension. Journalists knew they were witnessing a historic moment. Congresswoman Crockett has demonstrated courage and integrity in challenging policies that harm the most vulnerable. For this, she is being attacked with racist and misogynistic language that is inconsistent with the democratic values that the United States claims to uphold. Ibrahim paused, allowing his words to sink in. A BBC journalist raised her hand, but he continued before she could speak. "Burkina Faso recognizes Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett as a true defender of human rights. We, as a sovereign African nation, extend our support and solidarity to her at this difficult time." The room erupted in murmurs. Correspondents began typing furiously on their laptops, knowing that the statement would make global headlines within minutes. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., it was 8 a.m. at the Trump International Hotel, where the American president was holding morning meetings with close aides. The news came via his chief of staff's cell phone. "Mr. President," the aide said, interrupting Trump in the middle of a conversation about trade tariffs, "the president of Burkina Faso just publicly defended Congresswoman Crockett and criticized our administration." Trump stopped talking, his expression changing instantly, his breakfast of eggs Benedict forgotten on his plate as he processed the information. The Oval Office was buzzing with tension at 10 a.m. in Washington. Donald Trump paced the navy blue presidential carpet, gesturing as he spoke on the phone with the Secretary of State. How can a president of a country that no one even knows where it is have the audacity to interfere in our internal affairs? Trump shouted, his red face contrasting with his blonde hair combed to the side. Outside the window, the White House gardens were in full spring bloom, but the atmosphere inside the presidential office was stormy. Aides hurried in and out, avoiding the president's furious gaze. Mike Johnson, the White House spokesman, entered discreetly with a folder of documents. Mr. President, the press is asking for an official response regarding President Traoré's statements. Official response? Trump laughed sarcastically, loosening his red tie. I'm going to give him an answer he'll never forget. Who does this kid think he is? At 11:30 a.m., Trump decided to use his preferred platform, an unscheduled press conference in the Rose Garden. Reporters scrambled to get into position under the blazing May sun, which brought temperatures to 28 degrees Celsius in Washington. This president of Burkina Faso, what's the name of that place? Trump began, deliberately pretending to be unfamiliar with the country. This young military dictator has decided to meddle in American affairs by defending a congresswoman who hates America. Reporters frantically took notes. Some exchanged worried glances, recognizing the familiar tone that preceded international controversy. Jasmine Crockett is a left-wing radical who wants to destroy our country from the inside out, Trump continued, pointing to the cameras. And now we have an African dictator who can barely feed his own people trying to teach the United States of America about democracy. The statement instantly reverberated across social media and news channels. Within minutes, hashtag Burkina Faso and hashtag Jasmine Crockett were among the world's trending topics. Back in Ouagadougou, where it was already 4:30 p.m., Ibrahim Traoré watched the live broadcast of Trump's press conference in his office. Beside him, his top aides silently observed the diplomatic escalation. He doesn't know our history, Ibrahim murmured, not taking his eyes off the screen. But he will learn. The statement instantly reverberated across social media and news channels. Within minutes, hashtag Burkina Faso and hashtag Jasmine Crockett were among the world's trending topics. Back in Ouagadougou, where it was already 4:30 p.m., Ibrahim Traoré watched the live broadcast of Trump's press conference in his office. Beside him, his top aides silently observed the diplomatic escalation. He doesn't know our history, Ibrahim murmured, not taking his eyes off the screen. But he will learn. In her Capitol Hill office, Jasmine Crockett turned off the television after watching Trump's remarks. The room, decorated with photos of civil rights leaders and a Texas flag, contrasted with the tension that gripped Washington on that hot May afternoon. The 43-year-old Congresswoman had faced many political battles since her election, but she never imagined she would become the center of an international diplomatic dispute. Her phone was ringing off the hook from reporters, fellow congressmen, and even family members worried about her safety. "Congresswoman," said her chief of staff, Maria Santos, walking in with a stack of papers. "We've received more than 500 messages of support in the last hour alone. And look at this." She held up a tablet showing X. The president of Burkina Faso was being praised worldwide for defending her. Jasmine read some of the messages. African leaders, human rights organizations, and thousands of ordinary citizens expressed solidarity with both her and Ibrahim Traoré. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from her mother, who lived in Dallas. "Daughter, I'm proud of you. Keep fighting for justice." The simple but emotionally charged message moved her. At 3 p.m., Jasmine decided to call her own press conference. The Capitol press room quickly filled with reporters eager to hear her response to both Trump and Traoré. Wearing a navy blue blazer and with her natural hair loose, Jasmine approached the podium with the confidence of someone who has always fought for her convictions. "First, I want to thank President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso for his courageous defense of democratic principles," she began, her firm voice echoing around the room. "It is ironic that an African leader should have to remind the American president about dignity and respect." Camera flashes illuminated her determined face as she continued, "When I criticize policies that hurt the most vulnerable, I am not betraying America. I am defending true American values. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, then I am doing my job right." A CNN journalist raised her hand. "Congresswoman, What is your response to President Trump's personal attacks? Jasmine took a deep breath before answering. President Trump can attack me all he wants. He can use his divisive language and insults, but he cannot silence the truth. The cuts in humanitarian aid to Africa are a national disgrace, and I will continue to fight against them. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim was watching the press conference live. It was almost 8 p.m. local time, and the presidential palace was illuminated by the golden light of the Sahelian sunset. "She has courage," he said to Moussa Sankara, who was standing beside him. "Exactly the kind of leadership the world needs." At the headquarters of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Secretary General Moussa Faki Mahamat called an emergency meeting. The modern building, with its architectural lines blending African tradition and contemporary style, was abuzz with activity on an otherwise quiet Saturday morning. President Traoré's statement represents a milestone in modern African diplomacy, Faki told representatives of the 55 member states connected by video conference. For the first time in decades, an African leader has taken a firm stand in defense of democratic values against a world power. In Lagos, Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu interrupted his daily routine to say, "Burkina Faso has demonstrated that Africa will no longer be silenced when it comes to justice and human rights." From Senegal to Kenya, Ghana to South Africa, African leaders came out in support of Ibrahim Traoré. Social media exploded with hashtags like #AfricaUnited and #TraoréCourage. But the backlash was not limited to Africa. In Paris, President Emmanuel Macron faced a delicate dilemma. During a meeting at the Élysée Palace, his aides intensely debated the French position. "We cannot openly support Traoré. He broke our partnership and expelled our troops," the foreign minister argued. "But we also cannot support Trump's statements against a congresswoman who defends human rights." The French solution was diplomatically calculated, a statement advocating respectful dialogue between sovereign nations without mentioning specific names. In London, the British Prime Minister was more direct. "The United Kingdom values leaders who defend human rights regardless of their nationality." Meanwhile, on American college campuses, students were organizing protests in support of both Jasmine Crockett and Ibrahim Traoré. At historically black Howard University, hundreds of students gathered in the main quad. Today, we see a young African leader standing up for a black American woman better than our own president, student leader Sarah Johnson shouted to a cheering crowd. In New York, at UN headquarters, diplomats were quietly discussing the Traoré-Trump crisis, as the press had begun to call it. The Burkinabe ambassador to the UN, who had been instructed by Ibrahim to maintain a firm stance, met with several African counterparts to coordinate a joint response. Back in Washington, late that afternoon, Trump watched the news in his private office in the White House. Images of student protests and statements of support for Traoré from around the world made him visibly angry. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered to his chief of staff. "A little African dictator can't humiliate the United States like this." The U.S. State Department was in crisis mode. At 7 a.m. on a humid Monday in May in Washington, Secretary of State Marco Rubio called an emergency meeting of all the undersecretaries responsible for Africa policy. In the 7th-floor conference room of the Harry S. Truman Building, maps of Africa covered the walls as seasoned diplomats debated the implications of the diplomatic escalation. "Mr. Secretary," said Amanda Richardson, the Undersecretary for African Affairs, "we are receiving communications from 23 African countries expressing support for Burkina Faso. Some are threatening to revise trade agreements." Rubio, known for his hardline stance, shook his head with concern. "The president wants answers. How could a country with a GDP smaller than Miami's mobilize an entire continent against us?" Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was receiving his foreign minister, Olivier Ruamba, at the presidential palace. The government complex's tropical garden bloomed in the morning sunshine, but the conversation was serious. "Sir, we have received invitations for official visits from 12 African countries this week alone," said Ruamba, a 48-year-old veteran diplomat who had served in several embassies. "The president of Senegal wants to organize a special summit on African dignity in global diplomacy." Ibrahim smiled thinly. What about the American sanctions they were threatening? Temporarily suspended, the minister replied. It seems they realized that any punitive measures now would be seen as persecution. In Dallas, Texas, Jasmine Crockett was in her district office when she received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line, a voice with a French accent and perfect English introduced itself. Congresswoman Crockett, this is President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. I hope you're well. Jasmine nearly spilled the coffee she was drinking. President Traoré, it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you for your courageous defense. The honor is mine, Congresswoman. One true leader recognizes another. I would like to invite you for an official visit to Burkina Faso when your schedule allows. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, with Ibrahim explaining his vision for Africa and Jasmine sharing her experiences as a congresswoman. When they hung up, they both knew they had forged an unexpected but powerful partnership. At the White House, Trump learned of the conversation through NSA intercepts. His reaction was explosive. They are conspiring against America, he shouted during an Oval Office meeting. This is treason. His legal advisors had to patiently explain that diplomatic conversations between congressmen and foreign leaders were perfectly legal and commonplace. In the evening news, the story took on new dimensions. CNN revealed that American universities were inviting Ibrahim Traoré to give speeches via video conference. Fox News, in turn, intensified its attacks on both the Burkinabe president and the Texan congresswoman. In her Washington apartment, Jasmine watched the news alongside her 16-year-old daughter, Aisha. "Mom, you're making history," the teenager said proudly. "My friends at school are all talking about it." Jasmine hugged her daughter, feeling the weight of responsibility. Sometimes, daughter, doing the right thing means weathering the storms, but it's always worth it. A week after the diplomatic crisis began, the streets of several American cities began to see something unprecedented: simultaneous protests in support of both Jasmine Crockett and Ibrahim Traoré. In Atlanta, the birthplace of the civil rights movement, thousands gathered in Centennial Olympic Park in 32 degrees Celsius heat. Justice for Jasmine, respect for Africa, boomed from loudspeakers as protesters of all ages marched peacefully. Colorful posters featured photos of the congresswoman alongside Ibrahim with slogans such as, "True leaders stand together." Kesha Williams, 34, a professor of African American history, held a poster with a picture of the two. "It's inspiring to see a young African president defend our congresswoman better than our own government," she told reporters. In Detroit, a city with a large African community, immigrants from several countries across the continent organized a march that ended in front of the American consulate. Medu Dio, an immigrant from Mali, explained, "Traoré speaks for all of us Africans. He shows that our voice matters in the world." The demonstrations spread to other cities: Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, Philadelphia. In each one, the message was similar: support for the congresswoman and admiration for the Burkinabe president. In Burkina Faso, the popular reaction was even more intense. In Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, and other cities, thousands took to the streets in support of the president. Street vendors sold T-shirts with a picture of Ibrahim alongside Jasmine Crockett, which became instant bestsellers. Fatoumata Sawadogo, a fabric seller at Ouagadougou's Central Market, explained to customers, "Our president has shown that we are respected in the world. He spoke for all of Africa." The repercussion on social media was extraordinary. TikTok exploded with videos of young Africans and African Americans creating dances and songs celebrating the unlikely partnership. One song, created by a Ghanaian rapper, went viral with over 10 million views in 3 days. At American universities, political science professors used the case as an example in their classes. At Harvard University, Professor Dr. Michael Thompson explained, "We are seeing a new kind of diplomacy emerging, moral leadership transcending traditional boundaries." But not all the reaction was positive. Conservative groups organized counter-protests, especially in the South. In Birmingham, Alabama, about 300 pro-Trump protesters gathered with signs attacking both Crockett and Traoré. "America first, not Africa first," They chanted as police maintained a barrier between them and pro-Crockett protesters across the street. Tensions were rising, but something surprising was happening. American military veterans who had served in Africa began speaking out in defense of Ibrahim Traoré. Retired Colonel James Mitchell, who served in Mali, told reporters, "I know the region. Traoré is trying to bring stability and development. He deserves respect, not insults." At his official residence, Trump watched the news with growing frustration. Internal polls showed that 60% of Americans considered his response excessive or inappropriate. "How did this turn against me?" he constantly asked his advisors, who had no satisfactory answers. The Élysée Palace in Paris was bustling with activity on a cloudy May morning. Emmanuel Macron, aware that the diplomatic crisis between the United States and Burkina Faso could affect French geostrategic interests in the Sahel region, decided to intervene discreetly. In a call with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Macron discussed the situation. "The diplomatic instability in the Sahel affects us all. Traoré is gaining international credibility that could complicate our positions in the region." Xi, ever calculating, responded, "China is watching with interest. An African leader who challenges the West could be helpful to our long-term goals."